Ambassador Michel Goffin, thanks for joining us on Europe Now.
Thank you for having me.
Ambassador, the relationship between Belgium and Australia in terms of its bilateral relationship has been very productive and dynamic over the years. What should Australians know about that relationship and what's currently underway?
You know, they are excellent. And I'm not going to pretend it thanks to the ambassador. 4 years mandate in Australia. They always have been excellent, and right from the beginning, I would say, right from these terrible events of the First World War, where a lot of Australians went there, and a lot of Australian soldiers died in Belgium, in Flanders field. And so the bilateral relation is really resting on a lot of, I would say, solidarity and historical bonds. But despite that, we have a modern relation, bilateral relation, essentially in the trade and economic field. There's a lot of companies here, Belgian companies in Australia. When I arrived in June 21, a week later, there was a blockade, a COVID lockdown. And so I commit myself to have a meeting one-to-one on video, of course, with all the Belgian companies active in Australia. And I was surprised that it's quite a lot, and they're doing great business in different fields, in infrastructure. We had also a very important trade mission in 23, led by a princess. I came to learn that you guys like princess and royalties. So
sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. And so we have this quite amazing scheme of sending a huge trade mission presided by our Princess Astrid twice a year in different countries. And so Australia was there on the program in 23. That was a lot of work. But I realized that our two countries are very compatible. Belgium, I'm not sure a lot of Australians know exactly what is Belgium, where it is. I always say that Belgium is at the center of Europe, of course, but it was a very rich country, industrially rich country in the 19th centuries, mainly steel and big industries. And so we have, for a long time, a solid industrial base and engineering, innovative, even in the nuclear sector, which is popular nowadays to talk about nuclear, but we have a lot of engineering know-how. And when you come to Australia, and a lot of small, medium industries, not those big multinational, but those little guys that have a great product and innovative product, and creative product. And you come to Australia with that, and you see this country with an enormous potential. I mean, it's a very large country. Everything is in the ground, basically. And so you could really match these two countries together because I think there's a need in Australia for transforming this great resource you have in the ground into industrial activities. Every time I met ministers and important people, they say, we need more manufacturing industries here. We can't just go on with exporting gas and coal, and certainly not coal, and other rare earths and critical minerals. So the match between this industrial tradition in Belgium that dates from the 19th century and the potential of coming here and have cooperation with Australian business is what was quite striking to me, and I'm sure that's going to go even better in the future.
Against that backcloth, Many Australians watched with interest the 7 or so months that it took following the last election in Belgium for the government to form. Mm-hmm. And those kind of negotiations that took place from an Australian standpoint, I mean, it looked remarkably complex and involved, and no doubt it was. But how, for example, can you tell us a bit about how some of that now has played out in terms of, the really big areas of cooperation? I'm thinking, from trade and defence through to science and education, when you have that level of complexity and negotiation within the political process.
I know. Well, I think Belgium has the world Guinness record of the longest government formation, and that was in 2011. I think it was more than a year or a year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a different political landscape in Belgium. In Australia, when I observe the politics in Australia, to be honest, I find it a little bit, too much binary in a sense. It's either the people in government or the opposition.
Yeah.
The opposition is always saying what the people in government are doing is bad, we're going to do better, election, a change or no change. It's really binary, very, very black and white in a sense. We used to have that in Belgium a long time ago, but then, and I think there is a tendency a little bit here with the teal, the independence, and the party lines are falling apart a bit. But in Belgium, and especially because everything is divided by two, the Flemish-speaking and the French-speaking, we have a lot of parties. On the right, in the center, on the left, times two, that's at least 6, plus the green. I mean, then you green, French-speaking, Flemish, so it's 8, so there's a lot of parties. So an election is never clear enough to start next week and saying form a government like you guys do here. It's all about coalition. It's all about, okay, who wants to do things together with us? And so that's why it takes time, because they are negotiating a government program in the minute details, in particular this new government. There's a 200 pages of commitment. The coalition commits to do in the very, very minute details this and this and this during the 4 years of legislature. And so that's why it takes a long time.
2025 has been a year of huge political shifts. Yeah. And there are some writers, some critics arguing that what we're now seeing is a kind of tipping point in the global political system. That's no doubt against a backdrop of the rise of new nationalisms, of unilateralism. And of course, all of this has massive implications for the European Union in terms of its commitment to a cosmopolitan outlook, to a rules-based political order. What do you make of some of these arguments, and particularly the idea that, and the concerns across Europe that we just recently interviewed the ambassador from the Czech Republic, with elections coming up later this year, lots of, again, political critics warning that, that we might see a further shift towards these new nationalisms of what's happened, in Slovakia and in Hungary, the sort of rise of what's called the kind of illiberal democratic wing of Europe. Is that a fair characterization of some of these huge shifts that are happening politically, or do you think we need a more nuanced understanding? What's your perspective on this?
More nuance, and maybe a little bit more optimistic and more reassuring. I know it's very concerning. A democratic state, very important state like the US, can drift into autocracy at the speed of light, which is just very concerning. It happened in Germany, a very civilized, developed country in the 30s. last century is that it is always possible. That's the demonstration. It is possible. Pressure on the freedom of association, press, all sort of things are very concerning. But there is this thing that was created after the Second World War that has its headquarters in Brussels, which is the European Union, which is a very solid organization in terms of rule of law. And of course, there will be a development in the countries you mentioned. There is probably a little bit of concern in France also. But at the end of the day, on the long run, the EU it's the most beautiful, magnificent diplomatic creation in the last centuries. I always explain to Australians who not necessarily, they don't understand really what the EU is, in the sense they think it's just a common market and
right.
wine and feta cheese and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
when you study law in Belgium, in Europe, you study 3 layers of law: international law,
Yes.
UN, treaties, that sort of stuff. European law. So there is a layer in between. European law is law that are adopted by, or regulation that are adopted by the Commission and the Council and Parliament, that are sometimes immediately in national domestic law in a flash. Some other law or directive have to be translated into national laws. But so we have 3 layers of law. The EU is I think, a very, very solid institutions. Needs reform. It probably needs a little bit more courage to say to my Hungarian friends, that's it. No, you can't. We can't have a unanimity absolutely everywhere in foreign affairs, for example. The EU is completely paralyzed right now.
Right.
We don't even call the EU when there is a war and when there is a peace negotiation. The EU is completely off. But the EU is not going to disappear. There's discussion. I was very involved in as a Director General at the time into jargon. It's reform of the methods of work, and that's the thing. When you see reforming the methods of work of an institution, of the council instead, that's basically because it's not working at all. And we have to, at the end of the day, I think, we'll in foreign affairs, in European foreign affairs, we will end up in a few years on a decision, a majority-based decision, so that we cannot be blocked by one, 2 or 3 countries.
Right. Climate change has been top of the political agenda for some time. The European Union is committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. What is Belgium doing in this area, and what actions, concrete actions, is it taking?
To be honest, and outside ambassadors, diplomats like me, and especially when you come to Australia in June 21 under the previous government, and I remember when I presented my credential to the Governor General, I spoke about climate change because at the time climate change was almost taboo in Australia. It has now changed a lot. But we're not the best student in the class within the European Union, and in particular in the northern part of the country, very, as I said, very industrial.
Right.
A lot of, let's say, chemical plants and
Yeah.
and so it's not that easy. I mean, we commit and we are on the bandwagon of the EU in a sense, but it will take a lot of investment in the transition. Belgium is a leading advocate, for example, of green maritime shipping industry. We have a big shipping industry. Antwerp is one of the biggest port in the world, at equal level with Rotterdam, but my Dutch colleague will accept that Antwerp, Zeebrugge is a lot more important. And so in every field we try to decarbonize, but
Right.
it's fair to say that you have a northern part of Belgium very industrial. The southern part is a little bit more, let's say, innovative in terms of technology and medical science. So that's easier to change the industrial base of the southern part. But the northern part is a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
Now it's not just 2, 3 coal fire central. It's the whole industrial tissue has to be modified. But it will.
Let's leave Europe for a moment and come back to Australia. Ambassador, can you tell me about the embassy here in Canberra, the work that you do with your team, and the ways in which you support your communities across Australia?
We have a small team. We're 3 expat diplomats from Belgium, and then I think we have 7, 8 local engaged. We moved our consular affairs from Sydney. We had a consulate general in Sydney.
Right.
Closed that in, I think, 2003. And so we do a lot of consular work. It's probably the core business of the embassy in Canberra. Other embassies have consul generals and that sort of thing outside of Canberra, but we do consular affairs. What is a consular business? It's just new passports for Belgian citizens living here, new ID cards, registration of birth, that sort of thing.
Right.
So that's quite a lot. We don't have a large community like, I'd say, Croatians or...
Right.
We have 9,000 Belgian officially registered at the embassy. It's probably 15,000 in total. So it's not big, but that is a lot of work for us. I have, and people in Canberra will recognize that I have a personal passion for classical music. I'm a classical pianist. Not that good, but I wouldn't be ambassador if I was extremely talented on the piano. But I believe that diplomacy has to get out of embassy and secrecy and mysteries and stuff like that. We are now, the job has changed in 30 years dramatically. Our job now is essentially public diplomacy also. Showing where our values are, showing up, cultural diplomacy is getting important. So I organize at the residence quite a lot of piano concerts.
Right.
Not only with Belgian musicians or Belgian composer, but just Australians, just for having fun and inviting. I find there is a great public here in Canberra, very highly educated, retirees from foreign affairs, defense. And I had quite a decent public every evening. I organized probably 40 or 50 concerts at the residence.
Yeah. Well,
we do also say in that sector of public diplomacy, we had this. We had beehives in the embassy. It's a huge garden, and it's 30,000 square meters. So we had honey production. Then at one stage, I said to my staff and my wife, who is doing that, what are we going to do with 130 kilos of honey? Selling it, but embassy cannot just make money. I mean, and so we decided to sell honey and to organize fundraising for a beekeeping organization in Ukraine that we have now been supporting for 4 years.
Right.
Because I mean, war is terrible, but it's very much a catastrophe when you have a beehive and a honey business. You have to go to war, you come back, and the whole thing has been bombed by the Russians. So it's a very modest activity, but still quite successful. And we have a big event every World Bee Day. That's on the 21st of May. All sorts of things, let's say, that are new for embassies. Going out, celebrating important international days like domestic violence.
Right.
We have domestic violence problems in Belgium, but I think there is a serious problem in Australia also.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
And so we do a little bike ride, and we put an orange T-shirt and do a bit of bike ride in Canberra, just to mobilize the attention on issues like domestic violence or human rights, that sort of thing.
So it may well be the case that Australians are more drawn into engagement with a Belgian sensibility than they sometimes know. I'm thinking, not only obviously, as you know, Australians are sports obsessed. We've got the Davis Cup in tennis coming up later this year. Well, let's see. And of course, also, I'm thinking of cultural events, artistic events. I mean, so many Australians went to see the René Magritte exhibition across the country. And as someone that's visited the Magritte Museum in Brussels, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary.
That was an extraordinary event, because we were contacted by the organizers. Well, the Magritte Foundation, of course, has organized, I think, 200 expositions in the world. But the New South Wales government, the art gallery in New South Wales said, "Oh, we're going to do a Magritte exposition," which is probably the biggest cultural event for Belgium and Australia in the last 30 years.
Yes, it was magnificent.
And yes, we organized a VIP reception, and I was invited to there was an extraordinary pre-opening dinner with the Magritte Foundation, the New South Wales Art Gallery, some politicians. But I remember the CEO of the Magritte Foundation said there was 99 items in that exposition. Artifacts, but also paintings, but 99 things. And he said, "You see that guy, pretty old, not looking great, to be honest. He's from Antwerp. He has 50 items.
Right.
He led 50 items to the exposition. That's quite extraordinary. On that, I think that month or before or after, there was a painting of Magritte with the house with a clear sky.
Yes, with the lights.
Yeah. $125 million in that Christie's in New York.
Yes.
And I didn't know that. There's 17 versions of that painting.
Yes.
Because I said, well, there is one in
That's
Sydney.
right, yes. He often repainted and became so obsessed with particular themes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary. Finally, Ambassador, could I ask you, perhaps looking through your ambassadorial crystal ball, I know you're finishing up as ambassador very soon, but looking out to the future, what do you think might be possible, and what would you like to see in the bilateral relationship between Belgium and Australia as it develops and deepens?
I would wish to have a better interaction and understanding of Australians, and in particular politicians, towards the EU. And it has been, I was posted in Canberra in the early 90s, 92, 91 to 95. I'm a little bit half Australian because I married an Australian girl and been touring the world and coming back here. But even at the time, early 90s, there was absolutely no understanding of what the EU was, except that it's a big common market and we have to have a trade agreement, and that free trade agreement is still in negotiation now. And if I could, but it's difficult, of course, but if I could hope for the future that Australia will and I'll be frank here, get out of this Anglospheric approach to the rest of the world. The UK, now the US is a bit problematic, but let's stay inside our sphere of comfort and engage a little bit more seriously with the European Union institutions. I don't know if you know Asterix and Obelix. It's a cartoon, and there's a magical potion magique, and we always say that the Belgians fell into the potion magique of the European Union when they were young. We are absolutely very pro-European. Of course, Brussels hosts the headquarters of Europe, but I think it's a great, complex, but great institution. How can we, in the future, explain or explain mainly to the politicians what is actually the EU and how and why you should engage much more than what you do now. In particular, the free trade agreement, which is, I mean, it's as we all say, it's a no-brainer.
It's just taking some doing.
You have a market of 500 million people, and you are not running to the table to sign because there's a bit of an offer on export of meat that is not satisfactory, but the free trade agreement is much wider than just a few tons of beef or lamb.
Yes.
And that's because still now there is a very superficial knowledge of what the EU is. The EU is Erasmus plus. It's Horizon.
It is indeed.
It's thousands of projects and in research, innovation that Australia should jump on that and take
and is hopefully getting much more interested and involved in now. So we hope that continues.
I'm also ambassador to New Zealand, and I see the difference. In New Zealand, there's a much more openness and willingness to engage. There is a free trade agreement. There is Horizon Plus. Their ministers is traveling to Europe. Here, there's still a bit of work to be done, and that's my hope in the coming years.
Ambassador Goffin, thanks very much for joining us on Europe Now.
Thank you.